So, for all the years that Benjamin Netanyahu has been in the American media, I think there's very little sense in the U.S. about his domestic troubles in Israel. We keep hearing he's been charged, and the president of the United States keeps saying he needs to be pardoned. You've made this documentary that explains what is at the core of this controversy. Like, what are the charges? What is he accused of doing? Did he do it? So I'm going to stand back and just let you, if you would, outline what Benjamin Netanyahu has been accused of doing.
Well, roughly speaking, you'd say it was bribery, or you'd say it was corruption. I mean, and I can detail the charges. This is a film that I produced, and it was directed by Alexis Bloom. And back in 2023, I got a strange message on Signal from somebody who said that they had all of the police interrogation videos from the Benjamin Netanyahu investigation. And they had been investigating Netanyahu since 2016 for charges of corruption. That is to say, trading on his position as prime minister to get money in all sorts of favors, jewelry for his wife, very expensive Cuban cigars, hundreds of millions of dollars in forgiveness of certain loans in order to be able to get favorable coverage on a news website called Walla. So it was a pretty interesting case, and it went from the very small, meaning very expensive Cuban cigars from a rather famous movie producer named Arnon Milchan, to something very big, which is effectively a $250 million financial arrangement in exchange for coverage, good coverage for Netanyahu. So it was a pretty big deal.
What did so you got the tapes? Let me just ask, to the extent you can say, where did they come from?
I can't say where they came from. I can't say anything about the source, but what I can say is we got over 1,000 hours of tapes, and these were interviews with Netanyahu himself by the police, also Netanyahu's wife, Sarah, his son, Yair, also with a number of key people close to Netanyahu. For example, Nir Hefetz, his former head of communications, Sheldon Adelson, who we know in this country as a billionaire, now deceased, his wife, Miriam Adelson, Arnon Milchan, a famous Israeli businessman, arms dealer, who also became a very famous motion picture producer. So it was a kind of an extraordinary array of evidence. And while some of this evidence had been published in Israel in written form, nobody had seen the tapes. And the tapes are very revealing, particularly for Netanyahu, because Netanyahu tries to cultivate this image of the grand vizier, the great statesman of Israel. Here you see a rather petty, corrupt man desperately lying to save his skin. And his wife, who is a deeply entitled woman, trying to claim that, so what if we got stuff? I mean, we deserve it because we're doing so much for the nation and for the world. And his son, Yair, who is also extremely entitled, screaming at the police, yelling, you're like the Stasi. So it was an illuminating look at the actual character behind the facade, sort of like that moment in The Wizard of Oz where, Toto pulls back the curtain and the wizard says, please pay no attention. But it was really revealing.
If you can, and I think people watching this will watch the film, but I'm interested in your take, having watched 1,000 hours of this. What is it? Can you go more deeply into what do you think it reveals about the prime minister and his character?
Well, I think it reveals, a kind of deep-seated corruption, a willingness to do almost anything to save his skin. I think that he became possessed after the election in 2015 of a sense of enormous arrogance, that he was now the man, because he came back from what seemed to be a defeat to an enormous victory. And now he had this sense of entitlement. Interestingly, then he began to cash in on that entitlement, and he was caught. But what happened then was that rather, as he heard the sound of the possibility of the jail door slamming shut on him, he began to start to do things that really took Israel in a very dark direction. The first thing he tried to do was to essentially fix the Department of Justice. He tried to engage in a series of this is before October 7th. He tried to engage in a series of reforms of the judicial system, which would weaken the power of the judiciary in Israel. Most likely because that would undermine the case against him. That's the most direct likely outcome. But the other thing was that by this time he had formed a government with an extremely right-wing coalition with a guy named Ben-Gvir, who is head of national security, and a guy named Smotrich, who's is a head of the of finance. They are extremely right-wing, extremely anti-Palestinian, and their designs were to expand illegal settlements in the West Bank. And in some cases, well, it was already a dire situation for Palestinians on the West Bank. Nevertheless, there would be judicial orders which would sometimes get in the way of that. That was another aspect of this. Well, when Netanyahu tried to fix the judiciary, the country rose up, and it was in a huge uproar over these changes, which were fundamentally undermining Israel's democracy. Not too long after, of course, there was the terrible attack by Hamas on October 7th, which shocked Israel. What people began to learn was that for years, Netanyahu, again, I think, as part of the way he sees the world and as part of a kind of more generalized sense of corruption, had been trying to modulate the relationship with Hamas, and indeed had been allowing millions and millions of dollars to flow to Hamas from Qatar, sometimes in bags of cash traveling through Israel. And the reason he was doing that was to undermine the Palestinian Authority on the West Bank in order to be able to allow for his right-wing coalition to get more and more territory via settlements. So all sorts of strange, corrupt deals were happening. But then I think that post 10/7, which was a terrible moment, I don't want to minimize it in any way. It was a horrific attack, and we show some of that attack in the film. But he then launched an attack on Gaza, which was so beyond any sense of proportionality. Now we have at least over 75,000 people dead. Of course, now we have an Iran war and a Lebanon war and so forth and so on. But one of the goals, I'm convinced, and not me, but all of the witnesses who are, very reputable members of the security establishment in Israel in the film, indicate that part of the enduring ferocity, savagery of the war was due to becoming a wartime president who could then not be prosecuted or successfully prosecuted for the crimes he had committed. The trial, not only the investigation, but now there's been a trial. The trial is still ongoing. This is 10 years after the investigation started. So long as he's the commander in chief and he's waging war, how dare you attack the president? So in a way, this kind of venal personal corruption that starts with cigars and pink champagne, for which they had code names, and then evolves into corrupt deals relating to the media, becomes a mechanism by which slowly but surely the corruption got greater and greater and greater until it became a moral corruption in which the world is now engulfed.
We've got a new partner. It's a company called Cowboy Colostrum. It's a brand that is serious about actual health, and the product is designed to work with your body, not against your body. It is a pure and simple product, all natural. Unlike other brands, Cowboy Colostrum is never diluted. It always comes directly from American grass-fed cows. There's no filler, there's no junk. It's all good. It tastes good, believe it or not. So before you reach for more pills for every problem that pills can't solve, we recommend you give this product, Cowboy Colostrum, a try. It's got everything your body needs to heal and thrive. It's like the original superfood, loaded with nutrients, antibodies, proteins, help build a strong immune system, stronger hair, skin, and nails. I threw my wig away and right back to my natural hair after using this product. You just take a scoop of it every morning in your beverage, coffee, or a smoothie, and you will feel the difference every time. For a limited time, people who listen to our show get 25% off the entire order. So go to cowboycolostrum.com, use the code Tucker at checkout, 25% off when you use that code Tucker at cowboycolostrum.com. Remember, you heard it here first. There were people in Israel in public right after October 7th, which clearly was committed by Hamas and was clearly terrible. I agree with that. Want to be clear. But there were a bunch of people, including people I knew, who said, wait a second, this couldn't have happened if the government of Israel had really tried to prevent it. Okay, so there's something very strange about the ability of Hamas fighters on motorbikes and gliders and on foot coming across the most heavily guarded border in the world, and the delay in the response of the IDF to this. Like, what is this? And it's almost forbidden to say that, as you know, in the United States. But tell me what people you spoke to in Israel now believe about that attack.
I should point out that when you say I spoke to, I mean, the person who directed the film was Alexis Bloom. I got the footage. Alexis Bloom.
Of course. I'm asking you to speak for the film.
Sure. No problem. In any event, I think there were a lot of people who felt that a proper investigation into what Netanyahu knew about the possible impending attack by Hamas should be commenced. However, that got rolled under the carpet because of the fact that he's now in a war with Hamas. I mean, Hamas doesn't really have an air force, so you can't properly call it a war. But I think there was a lot of talk about how much and what advance warning Netanyahu may have had about the October 7th attacks. I've never seen, prima facie evidence of that fact, but there's certainly a lot of talk about it in Israel.
Okay, so it's not just crazy people on the internet who think it's possible or likely that Benjamin Netanyahu knew this was coming, had some sense it was coming, didn't do his best to prevent the damage within Israel because he was in this politically tough spot and the ensuing war would take the attention off him and allow him a pass on the charges. Is that a fair summation?
I personally think it may be a bit too cynical to think that he literally engendered an attack in order to be able to counterattack. But I do think that he had deluded himself, in part because he thought of the world as a series of deals. He had deluded himself into the idea that he had manipulated Hamas, and all the money that was flowing to Hamas, wasn't going to go to weapons and preparing an attack. I mean, he kept saying, what was the phrase? It's in the film, that he could control the height of the flames by the introduction of money. He also quotes the Godfather when he's talking to the police. He says, keep your friends close and your enemies closer, as if he was the Don and sort of able to manipulate events, but he clearly was not able to.
That seems like a smart interpretation to me. Of course, I don't know, but that sounds plausible, entirely plausible. So then October 7th happens. I think most Israelis are genuinely shocked that it happened, and they're horrified. And a lot of the world is genuinely shocked and horrified, including me. But then this war begins in Gaza, or this leveling of Gaza, this mass murder in Gaza, and then it expands to a lot of the region in the Levant and now into Iran. Is it too cynical to think that one of the motives there from the prime minister is to just keep moving forward because if he stops, he gets arrested?
Well, it may be a little bit too cynical. I mean, Bibi Netanyahu's wanted to attack Iran for years. In fact, I did another film about that subject called 0 Days. But I do think that once the momentum of war began, and I would say also that to some extent the momentum of war began to have a certain popular impact among the populace in Israel too, that now there was an opportunity to go after more enemies. So, and it had the byproduct, of course, of as long as there's war, as long as there's permanent war, Netanyahu will never be held to account. So once again, I think it may be a bit too cynical to say he attacked Iran so he wouldn't go to jail. But I think it had been a long-standing desire for Netanyahu to want to really go